So I'll be presenting on the research that I've been doing, and it's titled "Never an End in Sight: Emotional Labour and Wellbeing in Second-Time Working Mothers in Heterosexual Couple Relationships." Bit of a mouthful. Um, so here we go. All right, so I'll start off with a bit of background and aims, and talk a little bit about couple relationships just to contextualize. So the impact of couple health and well-being has been well-being of partners as well as of their children. And couples in poor quality relationships tend to be at risk of a range of negative outcomes, such as mood disorders, depression, anxiety, as well as deteriorating health. So becoming a parent has been identified as a stressful, complex process, challenging transition for couples, which involves major changes in their lives as well as to the couple relationship. And it affects relationship functioning and can affect satisfaction negatively as well. So we add to that the transition to parenthood, with many new parents experiencing decline in relationship satisfaction. So there's consistent evidence that the transition to parenthood can have a detrimental effect on relationship satisfaction because of sudden changes like in domestic work, the division of domestic responsibilities, childcare, spending less time with each other in the relationship. There can be increases in conflict, as well as decreases in relationship quality, and sustained declines in subjective well-being. So moving on from that, we then add another layer, which is that of second-time parenthood. So most of the literature focuses on the transition to first-time parenthood. There is a significant shortfall in research on the transition to second-time parenthood, so the lack of exploration on the couple relationship when becoming parents to more than one child, which can affect couple relationships in different ways. In the UK alone, there's 41% of families have two dependent children. So if we consider the large proportion of families with two children, it is quite a gap in the research. So there are a few studies that have investigated the transition to second-time parenthood. Not much, but the little research that is out there does highlight some differences, such as additional strain to the relationship, importance of having more space that is exclusive for mothers, that there is a greater difference in role differentiation in terms of household and family for mothers, and that can also lead to increased stress in the relationship with decline in both relationship quality, satisfaction, more insecure behaviors in relationships as well. So on top of that, unpaid domestic and care work is essential to both familial well-being and maintaining and sustaining other adults. So these responsibilities tend to fall disproportionately on women, with 75% of women globally taking on responsibility for daily unpaid care and domestic work. And this has been famously referred to as the second shift. So the second shift refers to additional unpaid housework and childcare responsibilities that women often take on after their paid work, which would be their first shift. And this can lead to increased stress, burnout, reduced well-being for women as we juggle paid work and unpaid household responsibilities. And inevitably, it can affect couple relationship satisfaction due to the imbalance of labour. So that's the second shift. So we go on to the third shift. This is just layers on layers. So more recently, attention has been paid to the third shift. And this is the unrecognised additional mental load and emotional labour undertaken by women, for the vast majority, who take responsibility of worrying about the emotional well-being of the family. So this refers to mental and emotional labour women perform outside of paid work and household responsibilities, so beyond the first shift and beyond the second shift. It includes tasks like planning, scheduling, coordinating, managing family routines, maintaining relationships, their well-being, reflecting and making decisions related to the family's needs. And it can also contribute to psychological stress, feelings of overwhelm, and burnout. But wait, there's a bit more. So if we look at gender disparities, which also persist in work-family conflict, so these are quite predominant. Women tend to experience greater pressures between work and family life than men do. Men are better able to prioritize work more and identify with their work role more, and are better able to do this because of the support received from their partners concerning care, domestic responsibilities. So these inequities can affect negatively also women's mental health, relationship satisfaction, and when work-family interference is high, women are more likely than men to experience lower work productivity and job satisfaction. So women tend to bear the brunt of care responsibilities and the ongoing struggle to balance work and family obligations, which is called the never-ending shift. So this is the addition of care work, including emotional, physical, and mental labour to the paid work that women engage in for employment. So that's the never-ending shift. So all of that leads to this study. So women are pervasively subjected to inequitable division of care work, responsibility of emotional labour, work-life balance, responsibility for that, as well as the mental load. So perceptions and experiences of these are interrelated factors, and its impact haven't really been considered on second-time mothers' emotional development, mental health, and well-being, as well as the impact on these mothers' couple relationship quality. So this is what this study investigates, which is the interplay between social norms, gendered experiences of emotional labour, and the impact on well-being amongst these second-time mothers who work and are in cohabiting heterosexual couple relationships. So how did I go about this study? Well, it's a mixed methods design, qualitatively driven mixed method, mixing two qualitative phases with a small qual weighting for the first phase, leading to a larger qual weighting for the second phase. So if we think that experiences and lived realities are multi-dimensional, we are complex human beings, so if phenomena have different layers, then choosing to view these from the perspective of a single phenomenon, of a single dimension even, might mean that our understanding is quite limited, incomplete, that our realities are more complex and more nuanced than that. So using mixed methods allows us to have a more nuanced and enhanced understanding and can offer a more balanced perspective. So this presentation will focus on the first phase of the mixed method study on the small qual. Participants, they were working mothers of two dependent children, so those under the age of 18, in a cohabiting heterosexual relationship with the father of both children and living in the UK. They were offered a prize draw of one of five, thank you, £25 Amazon vouchers. And this is my little recruitment advert, used in mainly Facebook groups targeted at parenting and mother groups, as well as word of mouth. So for the data collection, I used a story completion approach. So this is where we give participants the beginning of a story called a story stem. So it's a hypothetical scenario, and participants are asked to complete what happens next to the story's character. These can be written in the first or third person. In this study, it was written in the third person. So story completion is quite an innovative and inventive method of discovering contextual meanings that are held within stories. It offers exploration in an unpressured way of social perceptions and dominant assumptions about a topic, especially where social norms elicit socially desirable viewpoints, such as the perceptions of gendered effects of emotional labour and dominant discourses around motherhood. So it was quite ideal for this study. So underpinned by a critical realist stance, So following ethical approval from the Psychology Research Ethics Committee, I used a qualitative survey using SurveyMonkey and asked participants to complete 2 story stems, which I will show you, and instructions on how to complete these. I included some demographic questions and 2 open-ended reflective questions that were not compulsory for them to respond to, just asking for any additional comments about their thoughts, as well as asking if participating in this part of the study has influenced their thinking or perspective on this topic as an opportunity for reflection. So the instructions given to participants were quite open. So participants could respond in any way that they wanted to. They could take the story in any direction, the characters in any direction, focus on one aspect or a different one, do it as immediate or as far in the future as they wanted to. So there's no right or wrong way. I did ask for them to write at least 5 lines for each story just to try and elicit some detail in the data. So this is the first stem. I'll just read it, and it says, Sarah sat at her cluttered desk from which she worked remotely at home, feeling drained. With work deadlines looming and household chores piling up, she knew her plate was overflowing. Yet, in the middle of the chaos, she couldn't ignore the cries of her youngest child, Emily, age 2, needing her attention while her oldest, Jack, age 7, asked for help with his homework. As the clock ticked past dinner time, Sarah anticipated her husband's arrival. She felt the weight of expectations to be the dedicated employee, nurturing mother, and attentive partner. But as exhaustion crept in, she wondered, how would she balance it all without losing herself? Would anyone notice if she did? What happens next? So that's where participants take the story. So participants would complete this one, and then they would move on to the second one. And this one is a little bit different. So this one is in the middle of an important presentation to clients at her workplace. Laura's phone started vibrating continuously. Excusing herself, Laura looked at her messages to find that her youngest child, Sam, age 4, had just fallen badly at nursery, while her oldest, Emma, age 11, needed her football kit, which had been left at home. She now just wouldn't have time to pick up ingredients for that night's dinner. Her husband Ben was busy with his own job and often expected Laura to handle such issues. Torn between finishing her presentation, addressing her children's needs, and having to make do with takeout for dinner again, Laura felt like she was being pulled apart in many different directions at the same time. She felt constantly overwhelmed and stressed and worried about the toll it was taking on her relationship with Ben. But where was the time to even think about it all? What happens next? So I wanted to create 2 slightly different work scenarios that reflect current working trends. So one working from home, surrounded by daily life, and one at the office with an interrupting emergency situation or event. So collected data between May and September of last year, trying to target 100 participants, which is considered a large sample for story completion with 2 stems. Had a total of 189 individuals who engaged, but 84 were excluded due to being screened out. They didn't complete the stories or they wrote nonsense. Nonsense as in literal gibberish. So that left with a total of completed stories of 208, divided into story 1, 105, and story 2, 103. And you can see here the differences in the word count. So we had some participants that wrote a lot, 1,000 words, some that wrote very little, 5 words for story 1 and story 2. Just a little bit of demographic context. So most of the participants were married and cohabiting. Most of the participants were also in full-time work, and their partners' working patterns, most of them were in full-time work as well. I found it interesting as well, just to note that of the 12 that were part-time workers, 3 of the women were also part-time workers, and the rest of these were full-time workers. So remember, the participants will all be working mothers of 2 children, of 2 dependent children in a cohabiting relationship with the father of both children. And data were analysed using reflexive thematic analysis to generate patterns of meaning. Reflexive thematic analysis in order to highlight the importance of researcher reflexivity. And I took an inductive approach. And the findings will be integrated with the findings of phase 2, but also the findings help to inform the data collection design of the second phase of this study. So let's have a look at what some of the key findings were. So one of the themes that was generated was role juggling, and I've just put here just a quote, and these are some of the stories that I've selected as examples. So stories focused on how the women manage their multiple roles and their responsibilities. So the first story, if we see the S1 is for story 1, on the next slide you'll see S2, that will be for story 2, a response. So Sarah is of course expected to get on with it. You are expected to work like you don't have children and parent as if you didn't work. But Sarah decided that enough is enough and told her partner that he had to sort out dinner and bedtime. So this story captures expectations of conformity to oftentimes conflict in demands and tension between these two roles, work, motherhood, reflecting societal structures and norms that for that evening. The second story reflects the emotional toll of juggling multiple roles under these demanding expectations. So the second story says she's looking forward to her husband's return, hoping that he can share some of the pressure. She has multiple roles on her shoulders, employee, mother, partner, each of which requires a great deal of effort and energy. The weight of this expectation almost overwhelms her, and she wonders how she can balance it all, and wonders if she will ever truly be seen and understood, even if she tries. So here Sarah, the Sarah in this story, wishes to be truly seen and understood, pointing to the invisible emotional labor that often goes unacknowledged. So she's not sure if it's even possible, even if she attempts to find a balance between these roles. She's hopeful her husband can help, can share this with her, but we don't find out in this story. Participants completed the second stem, still under this theme. These were some illustrative quotes. So Laura could hear the screams, but thankfully nobody else could. The screams were only in Laura's head. Questions constantly whirred through her mind, and this made her feel like she was on a constant treadmill. Being a mother, wife, employee, friend, and a general human being all at the same time feels like trying to juggle jelly. So this illustrates the impact of the invisible emotional toll through screams only in Laura's head and her inability to pause or stop the continual questions that are running through her mind, suggesting a sense of powerlessness over this. So juggling jelly, I've not tried it, but juggling jelly seems impossible and seems to represent the impossibility of managing all the emotionally demanding roles at the same time and how these fragment as they are juggled like jelly would. The fourth story also presents a metaphor. So Laura felt like a rubber band being pulled in different directions, ready to break at any moment. She was constantly overwhelmed and stressed, worried that this state of affairs would affect her relationship with Ben, but the reality was that she had no time to think carefully about how to solve these problems. So again, the metaphor, the story presenting Laura as being able to withstand being stretched in her multiple roles and is resilient to a strong degree, but in the metaphor, Laura has now lost elasticity, strength, and her well-being can snap at any moment due to the sustained pressure. So the relationship quality seems to become secondary in the face of the other competing demands and roles. Another theme was that of emotional strain. And the quote here is, but who protects the iceberg from falling apart, from a different participant? So emotional strain was generated from the stories as something that was a bit of an embodied response to this unrelenting emotional labor. So the first quote, Sarah found herself being snappy with both children as the competing demands on her time and energy exhausted her. This happened often and she felt enormously guilty about it, but also resentful that she was put in this position by being the default parent for so much of the time, and that her husband got to work uninterrupted by domestic and childcare demands. So in this story, Sarah is positioned as the primary person, constantly taking the majority of the childcare, despite her husband being another person who could be involved. And as a result of this role's demands on her, she feels exhausted, which rolls on to affect her children when she snaps at them regularly, and she feels very guilty about it. So the Sarah in this story feels resentful of being positioned in this way, and also resentful towards her husband's ability to work free from the demands of this role. The second story highlights emotional overload, visibility of emotional strain. So I'll just whiz through it. The children were playing now, so she thought, I'll just make a cuppa before starting dinner. Bad decision. In the space of a few minutes, the house had turned to madness. Children were crying, snacks in the bedrooms, homework ripped, and she lost her temper just as her husband arrived home, an hour later than promised, but just in time to see the worst of her. She shouted at the kids as the pot lid slammed to the floor. The toddler started up crying again. All she wanted was someone else to put the kids to bed. So here we can see a lot of chaos, and Sarah's at her breaking point, at which point the husband in the story enters. And it's interesting that Sarah's desire for someone else to put the children to bed tonight seems to be a cry for a reprieve, but why someone else and not specifically mention the husband in the story? So the next story shows some emotional dismissal. Ben always asks her why she's angry. He says she's not the same person she is when they met. She spelled it out to him how difficult it is to work from home when you are surrounded by piles of clothing, papers, and toys, and how that makes her feel really overwhelmed. He says, just relax. The next morning, Ben says he has no underwear, and does Laura have any idea if there's some clean underwear somewhere? So here we can see emotional strain of not being seen or heard. The Laura in this story is not only managing her own overwhelm, but also the emotional labor of explaining and justifying her distress to a partner who dismisses it and invalidates her feelings and experiences here. She's surrounded by visual and mental clutter that seems to symbolize her unshared burden. And Ben's question, why are you angry, seems to reflect a lack of recognition at the emotional and cognitive load she carries. So I'm just aware of the time, so I'm going to be a bit selective here. So I just want to move on to the next theme, which is about mental load. And the ongoing quote here is, she's not the personal assistant for all the family. So the first story illustrates planning and anticipation, part of the mental load. So Sarah realized that she needed to find a long-term solution to balance work and family life. She started thinking about adjusting her hours or finding more flexible ways to work. At the same time, she is also thinking about how to better communicate with the children, let them understand their mother's hard work, and teach them independence. So this story illustrates that forward planning, emotional foresight that characterizes Sarah's mental load. She's not only managing her own responsibilities, but also thinking and strategizing for the future, both logistically in terms of her work flexibility and emotionally, so teaching independence, fostering understanding in her children. So that's an example of the mental load as invisible labor. The second story shows the illusion of help and impact on mental load. So life is too busy to even consider alternatives. She could have asked her partner for help with dinner while she finishes her last emails of the day, but would she be able to do anything meaningful while he comes round every 2 minutes to ask how many minutes for the microwave, what is it that he has to help Jack with, or to pass Emily to her, because she doesn't seem to calm down with the 2 tiny seconds he had tried. So this story captures issues around delegation that still requires supervision, as though she's a project manager. It seems that her mental load wouldn't be reduced from help from her partner, as it would be offered in a way that still demands her emotional and cognitive oversight. So the emotional labor involved would be thinking for her partner if she asked for support so she can finish her work. The third quote in response to the second stem, she also plans how to approach Ben about doing his share of the mental load because life is too short to spend with a deadweight partner. So lack of equity in the mental load. So the story reveals a moment of critical awareness, I guess, and emotional fatigue for Laura. It's become so burdensome, the mental load, that it seems to be shifting the relationship itself. And the use of deadweight partner signals some emotional disconnection rooted in imbalances of cognitive and mental load. And the next story illustrates the invisibility of Laura's mental load. So she juggles all these tasks. She tells Ben that it's okay, she's got them all, but her brain is spinning with to-do lists, and she resents the fact that the work she does isn't really acknowledged or recognized until she drops the ball, that is. So Laura performs emotional labor in this story, and her resentment stems not just from the volume of work, but from the lack of recognition. When it is recognized is when it fails. So again, reinforcing this under-evaluation of her labor. The final theme is shared responsibilities. He steps up and she feels relieved. So the sharing of responsibilities seemed to have a positive impact on the women in the story's well-being and to the relationship when the husband shared childcare and domestic labour. So her husband came home just as she was starting, and she said to him to look after the children while she finished dinner. It was nice to cook and do something where she could switch off. At dinner, they all sat together and chatted and laughed about their day. Sarah felt happy and made a note to go back to work and make some headway on those deadlines. So here we can see how shared responsibilities, even in small practical ways, can create emotional space for the mother, for the woman. By asking her husband to care for the children, Sarah was able to engage in some domestic tasks, so cooking. And while that's still labor, it gave her some space to disconnect. And then there was a positive family interaction that fostered some emotional well-being in this story. The second story says, when the husband came home, he picked Emily up and coaxed her. The baby stopped crying, and Jack successfully finished his homework under the guidance of Sarah. Sarah and her husband prepared dinner together, cleaned up the housework, and the whole family snuggled up to sleep at night. So here we can see the emotional labor is distributed across both parents, creating a sense of balance, mutual support, and the result is a harmonious family atmosphere where emotional labor seems to be performed collectively rather than in isolation. In the second stem, in the evening, Laura and Ben sit down for a deep conversation, and Laura expresses her dilemma and concerns. After a long silence, Ben finally promised to share more of his family responsibilities. Since then, the two have begun to face challenges together, and Laura has learned to better balance work and family, and the pressure of life has gradually eased. So this story here highlights some of the potentially transformative potential of emotional honesty and openness and tackling difficult challenges together as a relationship. Ben's eventual commitment to sharing responsibilities marks a turning point where emotional and practical labour begin to be rebalanced, with positive impact to Sarah's well-being. And again, in the second story, it's quite similar. So just aware of time. Yep. So brief comments in terms of discussion, given that there's a phase 2 of the study. So a brief visual summary illustrating the impact of emotional labour on mothers' well-being and the benefits of shared responsibilities in household and childcare tasks. So the findings highlight the impact of the emotional labour performed by mothers on well-being, the benefits of equitable distribution of household tasks and childcare, which is essential for addressing gender challenges and promoting healthier relationships and well-being. So the emotional labour performed by the women in the stories, balancing paid work, childcare, household responsibilities, emerges as something deep and often invisible force, shaping daily lives and overall well-being. So the labour is not just confined to the physical daily tasks, but it also covers emotional, relational work, mental load, etc. And all of this covers the second shift, third shift, as well as the never-ending shift that we discussed earlier. So just as a quick sneak preview of the next steps, phase 2, which is currently underway, which is the big qual. So this part is drawing on participants who said they would be interested from the first phase to participating in this second phase. And this time it's to explore the lived experiences of second-time working mothers with 2 dependent children. So interviews will be used to delve deeper into the lived experiences of second-time working mothers. We'll use 8 participants, and there will be several methods of data collection. There is. So a 4-day reflective time journal, which captures daily life, but also asks them to think about what else is going on at the same time, who else is involved, to try and capture some of the mental load and emotional labour experiences. And I've asked that the women complete it on 2 working days and 2 non-working days. They then email that to me along with 2 photos, and we organise an hour-and-a-half long semi-structured interview with photo elicitation, because visual methods tend to capture something a bit more multifaceted and complex nature of participants' experiences that move beyond language. So we experience the world through different modalities, and so it's good to try and engage with those different modalities to capture different experiences. It's also a more participatory and collaborative approach with participants as co-producers of knowledge and experiences that directly concern them. So the 2 photos will represent their experiences as working second-time mothers in cohabiting couple relationships, and will be analysed using interpretative phenomenological analysis to make sense of personal lived experience. That's what the reflective time journal looks like. A template. So they get this over 4 days. Obviously, there's loads more rows, and then at the bottom, ask for comments about the day, and then at the very end of the journal, it also asks for any other reflections they might want to add. And that is me. I just wanted to say thank you very much for engaging, and I also wanted to give a special thank you to ESRAD for funding this study, as well as to Lavisa Wega for supporting the study as a student researcher. And that is me.